Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Meet Lindsey, Mazza, Global Retail Lead at Capgemini, who joins the Voice of Retail to discuss their latest consumer study, What Matters to Today's Consumer 2025, highlighting AI's role in retail, the rising demand for ultra-fast delivery, and the future of retail media. She breaks down evolving customer behaviors and how retailers must adapt to stay competitive. Lindsey, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast, my friend. How are you?
I'm so well. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is not the first time you and I have had the opportunity to speak. You were a guest with Steve Dennis and I on the Remarkable Retail podcast. I think we were doing Jell-O shots in Vegas in our cabana, I think. Okay, maybe not.
That does sound like me, but not that time.
Well, maybe not the Jell-O shots part, but we were together. I think it was Grocery Shop, one of the grocery shops in Vegas, but we had you on a panel. It was a great interview, and I was so thrilled to see your name pop up. And you've got a great new study. I want to talk all about that. So clearly, I know a little bit about you, but introduce yourself. What do you do for a living, and how did you get there?
Well, thank you so much. It's so good to get to chat with you today. And of course, we do know each other, and it is from Vegas. Not the Jell-O shots, but I think we were in a cabana by the pool for the last podcast, which is a little better than my home right now. But I'm glad to be with you nonetheless, no matter where we are. I'm Lindsey Mazza. I'm Capgemini Group's Global Retail Lead. I am highly passionate about the grocery space. You mentioned Grocery Shop, especially in how we reduce food waste. But there's three things that I like to think about in our market today based on where retail is. And those three things are how we adapt to compete, how we unlock channel growth, and how we lead with purpose.
I mean, there's not many people listening to this that wouldn't know Capgemini, but tell us about your scope and scale in the business and what you guys focus on, and tell us a little bit more of that. And then, you describe your role as global. So you probably travel a lot. Do you make it up to Canada every now and then? Since a lot of my audience is Canadian, but not all of it. But tell us about Capgemini.
I'd be glad to. Well, Capgemini is a leading global professional services provider, but the big thing we focus on is driving business value. So, of course, we have incredibly innovative technology, and we bring that technology to market. But the business value that we drive is creating value for our clients, making, in our case, in the retail landscape, retailers be able to meet that experience where they get the innovation and they get the experience that is going to enable new customer journeys for them, new ways of operating their organization, and new ways that they can bring purpose-driven decisions to life. Capgemini is a highly global company. We serve clients in 185 countries. In retail in particular, we operate with centers of excellence in over 40 countries, and we bring these retail experiences to the world. For me, in my role, I am always traveling. However, I'm in Canada, which is very near to my home here in the US all the time. I've delivered major retail transformations for some of Canada's largest grocers, me personally, as well as our organization.
Now, how close are you to the 49th parallel? Where are you? Where am I reaching you today?
I'm in sunny South Florida, so I'm about as far as you get, but it's a short flight to Toronto anyway.
It's a short flight, and I'm a bit envious, I got to tell you, because I've spent the morning digging out. We got about a meter of snow here, which is quite unusual in Toronto. Florida. You guys got some snow too, though, right? Like, did you get it in your parts? I saw there's some weird weather in Florida, yeah?
I'm almost embarrassed to tell you that in Fahrenheit, it's 84 degrees right now. So no, we did not get snow in this area of Florida. I'm as far south as you can get. But in some parts of Florida, there have been snow this year. We did get snow on the beach this year. Just
right. I didn't think I was hallucinating. I thought I saw that because, of course, we the Canadians look and go,
I spent 3 long winters in Toronto serving a client there. So you don't have to tell me what it's like, especially coming downtown in those cold wind tunnels. But what gorgeous weather. And you guys are just made of hardier stock than us South Floridians.
I'm going to get to your report, What Matters to Today's Consumer. What matters to today's consumer feels like your report next year is going to be fascinating. I don't know if you're going to. It's fascinating. I went through it today. It's just fantastic. I feel like we're at a bit of an inflection point starting now-ish where there's going to be a lot of consumer behavior changes. I'm seeing numbers very early from different places that are equivalent to COVID type consumer behavior change numbers. How do you conceptualize your role in such a dynamic time, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, and I think our role is to be strategists for where the future is coming, but also realists about how we support retailers in their experience driving journeys that they create for consumers. And you're absolutely right. We are in a watershed year. It's the year where truly science fiction is meeting shopping reality. And 2025 and beyond will be about selling products for sure, but moreover, creating those experiences, about building trust, about meeting consumers where they are, whether that's TikTok, whether that's a virtual fitting room, whether that's a physical one. What I like to think of is 2025 is truly about practical innovation. And as someone who's been analyzing business and technology trends for decades, I'm enthralled with how 2025 is shaping up to be this year where we're truly going to see what was once science fiction in the technology scape come to life to become a reality. We're seeing a changing market. We're seeing changing enablers or the technology that supports it and a changing group of consumers. It's almost the perfect storm of technological innovation, of evolving business models and the market itself and the values that are being driven by consumers. And we're helping retailers to embrace those trends so that they can drive change in the market and develop closer relationships with consumers because of it.
Let's talk about the survey. Once again, it's called "What Matters to Today's Consumer," and tell us about how it's pulled together and what is it from a tradecraft perspective first. Then we'll get into some of the findings.
Oh, I'd be glad to. This survey is something very near and dear to my heart. We create an annual study of what really matters to today's consumer. And we look at what the questions that are going to be most impactful for each group. And then we also leave some questions that will happen over time. We survey 12,000 consumers between 18 and up, just over the age of 18, across 12 countries. And that's, North America-based, European, and Asia-Pacific. And we do that in October and November of each year so that we can get a view before we go into January for the following year of how consumer decision-making is changing and what's really important to them.
Very fresh data, relatively speaking, right? Very comprehensive and fresh data. I mean, there's pulses every now and then, but that's fantastic. 12,000, that's fantastic. Now, you break, I don't know if it's new for this report or if it's a long-standing formula for Capgemini and yourself, the 5 distinct customer segments. Talk about those.
A new way to categorize buying behaviors. As a longtime retailer, you and I both have probably talked about clustering for many decades now. At least 2 decades, we've been talking about the impact of store clustering or consumer segmentation on our decisioning around consumers' propensity to buy particular products. And that has helped us with things like, as we said, store clustering or assortment decisions, or even in our merchandise financial planning, our demand forecasts, and more. And so newly, we're looking at using those same algorithms, the ones that we use for those big retail decisions, like the K-means algorithm, in order to categorize the buying behavior that we get out of this study as well. So we've identified 5 distinct behavior clusters based on sub-themes. And those sub-themes were questions that we asked the consumers in the study, in the survey. So now each cluster represents a unique set of targeting opportunities for marketing strategies, for demand, for understanding who the consumer is, and really reflects their distinct lifestyle and priorities that the consumers are responding in the survey.
You know what I liked about the survey is when you cluster it each survey has a combination of different age groups. So it's really a behavioral versus age, which I always thought is so
That was very
valuable,
important
right?
to me.
Yeah,
so we certainly in the study look at the generational groups, and we look at every single question and evaluate that by generational group.
Sure.
You can almost put that to the side because not everyone in a generational group behaves the same way. It's much more important when you're creating clusters of consumers to understand what their demand is going to be and group them by their demand than it is to group them by factors that are standard to them.
Yeah, interesting. So I'll just read them off. Educated rationalists, convenience-led urbanites, grounded suburbanites, both of which average 42. Educated rationalists, average age 56. Digital-first trailblazers, average age 37, which is older than I thought. I mean, it's compiled of a bunch of people, but it's interesting. And then your traditionalists are a little bit older. So what's this K thing you describe? You've mentioned it a couple of times, this K thing, very, very unscientific way to ask you the question. But what is that, the K-means algorithm? Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. K-means algorithm is a method by which we cluster certain vector quantizations of groups of decisions. So it's originally from signal processing, and it uses a partition into different cluster groups. K-means just means you'll get however many clusters you get. You don't tell it how many clusters that you want, but it's a machine learning algorithm which is going to group different data sets into clusters based on their affinity towards each other. So being able to group these consumers that made the same types of decisions, regardless of their age, regardless of their household income or their education level, using the thing that they say is their demand or why they make purchases in order to function. And it essentially just allows us to create clusters that group consumers into affinity groups instead of based on static attributes. Why it's really important is you want to use dynamic attributes of a consumer to understand more about how they're going to shop in the future, rather than using particular finite things that define them as a person, because that like
a income, right? And what I've always observed, and when I've done this work, is it's always so fascinating because you could have someone who's buying a Canada Goose jacket, but really can't, or you wouldn't be in your traditional cluster because they don't make a lot of money, but they love a Canada Goose jacket, and they give up on everything else. They don't really care what car they drive and whatever, but they love that particular bespoke jacket. Is this what your formula?
Exactly right. I mean, in your circumstance, if you said only people in, this income bracket or with this type of job or, with this education level or in this generation are going to buy this jacket, you'd be missing out on a consumer group that says, but I actually work outdoors. And so therefore it's a requirement that I have something that's warm and cozy and is going to keep me able to stay outdoors all day. And maybe that doesn't mean that I fall in the income bracket, but this is the investment choice that I've chosen. So it is an allowance for us to use unsupervised learning algorithms for data clustering and group those consumers with particular affinities together so that we know what they have a propensity to buy over just their things that are static attributes about them.
Yeah, I feel like there's a big cluster of folks who shop luxury retail that fall into that category. Like, I'm going to save up all year and buy this particular Louis Vuitton product, but you wouldn't find them in a traditional grouping of people because their income, it just doesn't index the way others do, right? Fascinating.
And this is a standard. So this is an absolute standard in off-the-shelf software packages. It uses that, and even custom algorithm coding that we've done in all of our computer science classes, whether it's MATLAB or R or Python, even Excel. K-means is a pretty standard algorithm, and we've used additional language models on top of that K-means algorithm in order to further supplement.
So you've been doing this a long time. You're a veteran of looking at these kind of reports and talking to retailers and consumers. Anything surprising? Anything jump out at you when you looked at this report and go, wow, I was not expecting that? Any surprises?
Oh, there are so many surprises I would love to tell you. And I do think it's this industry facing tremendous disruption, and it's the confluence of three vectors of disruption. It is the market, the enablers, and the consumer all coming together that have made these tremendous changes. The biggest surprise for me was the tremendous increase in demand for fast delivery. And I think that is truly influenced by the idea that consumers have this need for, or a preference for, key attributes when they shop. And that key attribute has moved from around a 2-hour delivery window to a 10-minute delivery window. If you would have asked me, I would have said there's no way that would be true globally or in our own North American markets. But what we saw from the study is that consumer preference for quick delivery surged significantly over past 2 years. And in the 2-hour, for instance, it increased from 34% to 65%. And almost 70% of consumers say that they had a preference for 10-minute delivery. So what this means is that the consumer is truly moving to a more convenience, more last mile type of expectation this was a major surprise for me in this study.
So let's unpack that a little bit. It's fascinating because, generally those faster, whether, you're using grocers could be using the Instacarts of the world or whoever, Uber delivery, whatever, that comes with a fee. Do you think that consumers are making a rational trade-off? Because I don't use rational and consumers sometimes in the same sentence, but are they making a rational trade-off to say, listen, I want one thing, I maybe don't need it this fast, but if I go to the store, I'm going to buy many things. So I just want this one thing. What do you think's going on behind the numbers here? Because I've been, I was skeptical of this 10 years ago. I said, they drive for free shipping every time. Like they just seem to live, they being consumers. And now suddenly they got the other end of the spectrum where they're paying $14.99 to have it delivered in a few hours. What do you make of this?
Well, I'm very skeptical that it's true. So I think that there is a major difference between what consumers say they want and what they're willing to pay money for. So I think that while consumers have demand for ultra-fast delivery, they're not going to be able to pay or not going to be willing to pay what it takes in order to get it. In the study, what we found is that for the highest ever percent of total order value is willing to be paid by consumers. That's 9%. That's up from 6% last year, up from 4% the year before, from 3% the year before that. So it's the max that consumers have ever been willing to pay of the total order value for that ultra fast delivery. But still 10% is not going to get us over the mark of making that free to the retailer for delivery. It still costs probably 17.5% for average orders for retailers to deliver within that time frame. So I still am skeptical that consumers will ever pay the price that it takes for retailers to be able to do it. And that therefore will impact the infrastructure required in order to get us to the point where we actually fulfill on that method in North American markets and in Canada and the US in particular. I don't think that we'll get to that 10-minute delivery window. But I do think what we're seeing is that the expectation is quick commerce is going to be supported by advanced logistics and AI, and that will dominate, and consumers are going to be willing to pay for that speed. And what that's going to mean is that more and more retailers will have to adapt more generative AI transformative technologies in order to be able to be more consumer centric and to reduce the cost of their overall operations in order to get there.
Interesting. Now let's talk about AI for a little bit. It's the first time it's come up in, 15 minutes? We're already in the first time we're saying AI, but we've talked around it. Let's talk about it. So, when I've talked to retailers so far, most of them are saying the path for them in AI is more behind the house. Some of what you're describing, for sure. The idea that they can improve their processes, that they can automate routine processes, that they can fix their supply chain. And they're not, as a general trend, they're focusing there for a few years. Are you seeing them as a group turn their minds to the consumer interface and AI? How do you see that?
Actually, I see quite a lot of consumer engagement with AI, but I think the back of the house is extremely relevant and needs more attention. What it really is that new technology is being adopted by consumers at lightning speed. I mean, it took 17 years for 100 million consumers to get cell phones, but it only took 2 weeks for 100 million users to use ChatGPT. Yeah. We went from, as technologists, building systems that used algorithms to think in straight lines to building systems that think in parallel like the human brain. And from a practical innovation perspective, that means that as new models gain more function, some of those older models of AI, generative AI, machine learning are getting smaller, they're getting cheaper, and we have decisions about what and how we use each function we imagine. So it's going to allow us to use technology in new ways in order to get there. From a consumer lens, we're seeing, the idea of retail media networks using generative AI in order to understand what advertisement I should place in front of each consumer. So there you have a very consumer-centric point of view. We're using gift finders, right? A lot of CPGs and retailers over holiday season made a gift finder where you put in the age, the budget, the interests, favorite themes, things like that. And you got to pop out what the gift that you would give for your relative, your friend would be. So some very imminent consumer facing ways. We saw, the idea that we are going to tell somebody what they should put in their shopping order for groceries at any given moment based on their need for nut-free, allergen-free, dairy-free diet and 3 meals a day for a family of 4, right? So that we can generate all of this information and create carts are very consumer-centric, convenience-driven ways of using generative AI. In the back of the house, we're seeing AI technology in delivery vans to help drivers quickly find packages and save them time on routes. We're seeing, local fulfillment and local delivery become more and more effective. We're seeing demand forecasting. We're seeing product development, inventory strategies, marketing campaigns, all using generative AI technologies at various levels of that, whether parallel thinking or linear thinking, in order to get there, to create better understanding of who your consumer is and how you can serve them.
So if the adoption of AI or the progress of AI is a baseball game, what inning are we in?
The first. We have a long way to go. But the thing that I would like to say is we're further along than we can imagine, and we're also further behind than we can imagine.
Are retailers ready for this, Lindsey? I mean, that good data, pristine data, I would say, is just so critical. I worry sometimes that it just gets us to the wrong place quicker. You've been inside the data rooms. You've seen enough data to know that data hygiene is plus or minus a big priority. What do you think?
You're absolutely right that what it can lead to is getting 30% more ineffective code if 30% was wrong to begin with, or 30% more worse service delivery if that's where we were. I am not one of these that's of the mindset that data has to be perfect in order to move forward. I don't think that we're ever going to get to perfection. And I think consumers are moving faster than we can imagine. We are on the verge of the most profound industrial revolution in human history. Our expectation is, how do we influence consumer choice? And as we as retailers are leading in the market, our ambition should be, how do we support consumers in their convenient, value-driven lifestyles, where we put a digital wrapper around everything in the physical realm, blending retail spaces, allowing data to make consumers human, and giving every space a consumer potential. I really think that we're at the point now where our ambition has to be, how do we win in the pre-shop? How do we have, with social commerce on the rise, how do we blend or blur that line between browsing and buying? How do we create interactions that yield to transactions, that build community, that build advocacy? And how do we put the consumer at the front? The consumer is more vigilant than they've ever been. They are more communal than they've ever been. They are looking for very public-minded, activist type lifestyles. They're resourceful, they're impatient, and they really want to be out there with true information. And so the more that we're able to give them tools that allow them to, put money away for the future, or strive to improve themselves and their abilities, or be activist and voice-minded, or, use apps that are quick and easy to navigate and deliver to me faster, the more we'll win as retailers.
Your report highlights that, I was surprised this number, 60% of consumers are replacing traditional search engines with Gen AI. Now, there's a bit of blurring there, because as I search on Google, for example, I see Gemini kind of kick in at the top, which is super interesting. But how should retailers be thinking about this, and how are consumers reacting? That's an adoption rate that I thought, I guess it gets to your point about speed of adoption of everything. The pace is just escalating, yeah?
Well, when I see that, what I know is that we have more and more chance to influence, right? So we're looking at, how do these decisions that consumers make about where they're going to evaluate data, that they're going to replace their search engines, they're going to be getting advice from people I say with quotes, that they may never have spoken to before. And that interaction has to be very authentic. 70% of consumers are shopping via social media, and they're seeking advice from influencers. That's up from 50% last year. And believe it or not, more than 2/3 of consumers are noticing the ads on retail websites. So we're getting to more personalization through retail media networks and through the discussions that we're authentically creating that are supposed to make easier shopping available. When we talk about this increase in replacing those search engines, we see this across all generations. So it's 58% this year have replaced the search engine. That's up from 25% last year. This is not just true for Gen Z. Gen Z is at 65%, but you know who's even higher? Millennials are at 67%. Boomers were at 44%, and Gen X was at 62%. We have significant dominance of using some of the more chat-based features that allow human language for search that are going to increase my consumers' willingness to use this new technology, and therefore their expectation that that same human language search is going to be available on your retail websites and in conversations with your service agents when they shop.
I guess I've heard this described as the agentification of AI, right? That you have purpose-built, very specific helpers that address certain specific things. Are you seeing more of that? Is that just a buzzword, or is that real?
Oh, this is beyond real. Right now, this is where I tell you about the science fiction meeting shopping reality. The idea, and I talked about, creating the food plan, but there are already retailers who are out there that planned our Super Bowl party for us just based on basic information provided. The agentic AI is now the next generation of generative AI, where the agent is able to use human language and with very little human intervention to plan, to analyze, to make decisions, and to speak back in additional human language, sharing information that they've learned. So by providing the most minimal amount of information, just like those gift finders we talked about earlier, parties are able to be planned, menus are able to be planned, ideas about themes, about what is relevant for the people in your life is able to be planned. These can be used in a variety of sources, anything from travel planning to food planning, meal planning, you're planning your home and your schedule and what you should get involved in. These new agents are the future of retail.
Wow. All right. So you and I both know that retailers listening do not have infinite budgets. They have to make decisions. So I'm going to give you a magic wand or the last dollar of a retailer's budget. And based on the research, your report, where would you spend your money? Is it more AI? Is it doubling down on influencers? Is it, trying to get more engaged in retail media? Is it digital shelf tags that then have dynamic pricing? Like there's so many, the menu is a little overwhelming. But if you had a last dollar to spend, what, based on your findings, would be the number one priority you would advise retailers to spend their money on?
All of these things are great priorities. But if I had my last dollar left, my advice would be there's 3 areas that you can make an impact in. The first one is in unlocking channel growth, where you must grow top line revenue. That would be on retail media, because I believe retail media is the new influencer that is going to help you connect to your consumer in an authentic way. In the adapt to compete space and inside our house, supply chain is the new consumer differentiator. We've taken supply chain from back of house to a consumer differentiator. It's now about experience. So I'd be using technologies in order to support better operations for my business. And lastly, in leading with purpose, I'd be investing in food waste reduction because it truly pays off. Now, interestingly, you asked, would it be in generative AI? And I say, no, it's not in AI. We're leaving the age of use cases behind and moving into the age of value cases. So it's in whatever technologies are required in order to get you better media, better supply chains, and pay-offable or profitable, purpose-driven outcomes.
Well, where do people? This is a fascinating conversation. How do people learn more? Get their hands on this survey? Get a hold of you? Ask you important questions? Where do you find you?
Find me anytime on LinkedIn. I'd love to get a DM from retailers of the world. And anytime you can find our Capgemini research at capgemini.com from our research institute.
Well, Lindsey, it's been such a treat to have you on the Voice Retail podcast, making time for me here up in the Great White North, literally today as I dig out my driveway. It's such a treat. I look forward to seeing you. You and I cross paths often at some industry events. Perhaps we'll cross path up here. And listen, I wish you continued success, safe travels, and continued great work, as I think, boy, we need it, and we need lots of great advice. So thanks for doing this, and listen, have a great rest of your day.
It's my pleasure to join you, and thanks for letting us share what matters to today's consumer.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.